OTB's The Hurling Pod with James Skehill and Paul Murphy.
Tá craobhna here in an Ashangailum. People of Galway, we love you.
I don't want to leave the people of Waterford down, you know, because they're my life, you know. People of Waterford are my life, you know, and I love me county, you know.
We love John Malone.
It's almost like they're afraid to kind of go on hurl and just let themselves express themselves. It's like as if they're nearly afraid to make a mistake, and sometimes you have to make a mistake and just throw off that bit of nervousness and have a go.
Yeah, it's pure constipated hurling.
You are very welcome along to episode 22 of the Hurling Pod, where we're looking back on Limerick's 131 to 226 victory against Kilkenny in the All-Ireland final. After waiting 45 years for a title, the Treaty Men have now landed 4 crowns in 5 seasons, their 11th overall, with Garrod Hegarty scoring 1-5 from play in a man-of-the-match performance. The first time that Limerick have lifted the Liam McCarthy in 3 successive seasons. They become the first team outside the Big Three to do so, and their captain Declan Hannon made some individual history by becoming the first man to lift the cup 4 times as a skipper. John Cahill has described this success as the most enjoyable of their run going back to 2018, and they're now a remarkable 16 games unbeaten in the championship, which stretches back to their semi-final loss to Kilkenny in 2019, which they avenged in the All-Ireland final. Little consolation now for Kilkenny, but 226 is the biggest ever scoring total by a losing side in an All-Ireland final. Delighted to say James Skehill, Paul Murphy are here to break down the final and the end of this season. Lads, how are you getting on?
Great, Will. Good. How's things, guys?
I'm surprised you say great, Paul, but is that a reflection maybe of a happiness of the Kilkenny performance against Limerick? Because, you know, as awesome as this Limerick team have been, that's as hard as they've had an All-Ireland final as 2018.
Yeah, look, there's no good way, I suppose, of losing a game, but when, like, you know, the display the Kilkenny team put in yesterday, I think every Kilkenny supporter was walking out there going, like, what more could they do against this great Limerick team? Like, it's a tip of the hat as well, I suppose, to Limerick, really, because, you know, Kilkenny were down by 6 points at one stage, and you're just there going, this game could get away from them very quickly, and they just kept staying in touch, just kept fighting. That was really it. They just kept fighting. So, like, really coming away as a supporter, you were saying there was no more they could do. I'm sure the Kilkenny team themselves will go, you know, they'll potentially look back at it and say, oh, what about this, or we could have done X, Y, and Z. But no, you have to think about these things in the 70 minutes. You only get one crack at it. And, you know, like I said, they died with their boots on. And I was, as a supporter, just really proud of their performance. So, in one way, look, like I said, there's no great way of losing, but it's heartening, the performance. And you couldn't ask any more for them. You just definitely couldn't. So, look, as All-Ireland finals go, it was an absolute cracker. Credit to Limerick. And our lads did us proud in the day.
Yeah, when it comes to Kilkenny, Paul, there's some issues we can talk about, definitely around how the Limerick half-forward line got a lot of space, and some of that's down to how well they played, and some of it's down to Kilkenny's system. The puck-out didn't work all the time for Kilkenny during the game, which we can dig down into. But from an attacking perspective, Reid puts in probably one of the best performances from a losing player in an All-Ireland final. But also there was some very kind of classic Kilkenny about the way that they took the game on. The 2 goals come from direct ball, which were well played in, and, you know, good flicks and work by their forwards to make the chances for Ryan and for Cian to score the goals. Showed that bit of grit, as you mentioned, at different times. Like, I kind of wondered at half time if Limerick were going to start running away early in the second half. They get 6 points up, but Kilkenny never really drift out of the game. And even it took a good finish from the game from Limerick to get over the line by 2 points in the end. There was a lot of kind of what I would call good traditional Kilkenny values about the performance yesterday.
Yeah, there was. And when you look at half time, being down by 4 points, like, you know, talk at half time, we were saying, look, well, this game is only going to open up a little bit more. Like, bodies are going to get tired. It's very hot out there. You know, there's a lot of hits going in. So indications were there that possibly, you know, if bodies get tired, a little bit of room will open up and potentially Limerick might get through for another goal. But look, the opposite happened. Kilkenny came out and basically said, look, we're after throwing the kitchen sink at them here in the first half. We're going to have to find something a little bit more, and they did, and they found 2 goals. So, like, that was incredible to do that, to get to find something else, and to, I suppose, penetrate a Limerick full back line that's been found very hard to do over the last few years, and to snuff out 2 goals, or to get 2 goals, like that in itself. We said it last week, they were going to have to get goals, and they went out there and they did that. So that's, you know, that's something that they deserve great credit for. And anytime Limerick threatened to go ahead again, Kilkenny just said, no, get the scores, just get back in touch of them, and then brought it back to a draw. So there's so many things about it, and there was lots of performances around the pitch that like you said, was traditional, I suppose, what people would associate with traditional Kilkenny values or hurling or whatever you want. Like, you know, we talk of these systems at the moment of people working balls up the pitch and possessions and all these things, but, you know, there was great high fielding yesterday. There was direct ball. There was lots of hooks and blocks. You know, I saw a stat, I think Ray Boyne had it up there yesterday, that Limerick had over 100, and I think Kilkenny were in the early hundreds or maybe in the late 90s for hooks and blocks. So there were so many of this day and age, of talking about systems and everything that goes with it and what goes on off the pitch in terms of the likes of Paul Kinnerk and these lads and what they bring to it. But, you know, so much of the traditional hurling was there yesterday, and I think that's what, whether you were in it for the tactics or you were neutral, that was just there enjoying the game of hurling, and very little wides as well. So there was so much, not just from a Kilkenny point of view, from the traditions, but also from a Limerick point of view as well. But we certainly look from Kilkenny, we're very proud of the way the boys hurled.
Yeah, James, it was a very efficient performance from both teams. I think it was only one wide from a free, which was the one that Old Murphy had popped from, which was a long way out. Mm-hmm. And even Limerick were able to pop that Dermot Burns one over from pretty much his own 21-metre line, which was a remarkable score into the hill in the first half during the game. And shot selection generally was pretty good. I think I can only remember really one moment where TJ Reid had a chance from play that you probably will feel he should have done better from. The shot selection and execution was really good, which is why we had such a score fest during the game. First half maybe felt a little bit more like a flow where there was a bit of freedom, where there was just a lot of shots happening. For me as a neutral, I really enjoyed the battle of the second half. I don't know what your take was on it, Skehill.
Yeah, well, I suppose as a neutral yesterday, if I was a supporter now, let's say, in either camp, I'd be, you know, itching for to be a KG fair, let's say, on one side, and our team scoring more. But from a neutral perspective, I was delighted with the performance of both teams. Like, I think both sets of forwards came to play and they performed on the biggest stage of the year. So credit to both of them. But I actually tweeted at half time that Limerick were on course for 40 points. Like that was the efficiency that they were producing. And like, if the scoreboard wasn't up on the television, like, you would have said that Limerick would be nearly run away with it a bit. That they were vastly in front, but Kilkenny just kept plugging. Like I've been saying all year, that's what they're always in the fight. It's terribly hard to knock them out, if you know what I mean. And that's just down to sheer, I would say, grit, determination. Their forwards worked ferociously hard. You know, sometimes they have to do the job of two lads sometimes because of the way the style of play they have. But Limerick are just a colossus of a team. And I know we're talking here, we're sitting here today, and they've have to win the third in a row. But we could be here next year 4 in a row, and the year after 5 in a row. It's just, it screams to me that whatever they want to achieve, they can achieve it. You know, because I think they're in control of their own destiny, if that makes sense. You know, I know that the margins of victory have decreased somewhat. Like, when you consider, like, the last year's run up to the final, they won the semi-final and final by a cumulative 27 points, whereas this year they won it by a cumulative 5. You know, so one would think that the pack is getting closer, but I always feel like, you know, they have an extra step, and then we can also throw in the mix that Cian Lynch is back next year. You know, so if you were taking any other team, like if you took TJ out of Kilkenny yesterday, you know, that the Kilkenny forwards would no doubt about it, suffer dramatically. So like, we're sitting here after Limerick winning 3 in a row, and they've done it without Cian Lynch. Like, so that's a testament to the squad they have and the group they have, and it's just the sky's the limit, to be honest.
Yeah, because look, I think, James, this probably enhances Limerick's legacy in ways too, because they had to go most of the championship season without Cian Lynch. Like, let's be fair, he gets injured very early in the second game. He has a bit of a cameo in the semi-final. He's ruled out the final entirely, which was, you know, a horrible thing to happen on the week of the final for such an important player. To do so without a 2-time hurler of the year, to have to find different solutions when Kyle Hayes got injured early in the championship as well. The machine and the system with Limerick, we've said it so many times, you can set your watch to them. Again, this is 3 All-Ireland finals in a row where they've gone past 30 points. Yeah. The machine just keeps ticking. Yeah, and it ticks very well. And it's like, they're extremely adaptable. And one word I would say this year on their victory is significant. This is a significant victory they've won now, because they've won the championship. You'd perceive it to be the hard way. You know, they've come through titanic battles, a number of battles. They didn't just cakewalk it like they did in the last couple of years. They've come through real stern tests. The likes of Clare, Galway, Limerick, or Kilkenny really put it up to them, and they just always seem to have the answer. Like, and it's amazing how adaptable they are, because I had the audacity to, back in, here was it 2020, I think it was 2020, lads, when Hayes and Nash went back into backs, cornerback and wing back respectively, and I was thinking before we were playing them, we could get at these lads, because these are forwards. Like, that was just hindsight is grand now, but here I am looking at them. They can play anywhere, you know. I honestly believe, I think Gareth Hegarty plays centre back for his club.
You know, so like they're very adaptable. They can play anywhere, and so if some lad falls and happens to be injured, like Cian Lynch, they filled the void very well. So they filled it very well, and they found another hurler in Connor O'Neill, who probably not too many choices. Don't get me wrong. Now is in for a shout Young Hurler of the Year. So they have like it's sickening in one way for a Galway lad, because they have an embarrassment of riches, you know, and they have generational players, and you'd nearly be grateful watching them, if that makes sense, you know, because you get to witness the Hegartys, the Hayeses, the Lynches, all these lads playing at the height of their powers, going up against a team like Kilkenny and producing the magic that they yesterday.
Yeah, like I was into Declan Hannon, Paul, after the game, and he was talking about this great hunger there is among the group to try and build and to win more on this. And even this morning on OTBAM, they were chatting to some of the players, and Dermot Burns comes on and they're asking him if he's having a fry after the night before. No, he was having his fruit and he was taking it easy for the day, because he's trying to keep up the habit of what he does normally. This does not strike me as a team who are going to go off the boil. Like, this seems like a team who are determined to come back, and 3 in a row is not where they want to stop.
No, yeah, and I think there's plenty of instances in the papers and in media over the last 24 hours where that has been indicated, and they talk about the future and more silverware and so on. So it's plain to see where these lads' heads are at. Like, the idea that maybe a few years ago people would say, well, look, now that they're winning, there's potential for the feet to come off the ground and get carried away. Well, we can see that that's not there. Part of that will be down to John Cahill and that in terms of enforcing it in, but a lot of that will be enforced by the group and how they actually just conduct themselves away from the pitch. So the idea that Dermot Burns is eating fruit this morning, that doesn't stand well for Kilkenny and Galway over the next few years. But look, it's a testament to them. It's a testament to, I suppose they're planning ahead. They're already preparing, really, I suppose, for next year. It's a daunting task for any county to go up against them, but if you're in any doubt over where these lads' heads are at, like it's probably nearly been turning towards 2023 already, so yeah, look, hopefully we'll try and trick him into having a few more fries. We might get Tommy Welch down there during the week and to give him a talk about having a fry in 2005. But
Murph, from a Kilkenny perspective now, I obviously we didn't have the pleasure of, let's say, what are they chasing now, do you reckon? Like, they're not chasing just a singular title, they're chasing legacy, I'd imagine. I'd
say so. I mean, imagine at this stage now, it's not, I think they're going to take it year on year, and next year when they go back, they'll focus on that. I suppose it's not the end of, they're not looking to think of 5 years' time or 6 years or whatever years' time where they look at us as the greatest team. I think they're just enjoying the roller coaster at the moment of next year. When next year comes around, they're enjoying the celebrations now because they hadn't had them for 3 years. So next year comes around, I think they'll just enjoy the journey. I think that's what it's about. Like, they're on the crest of a wave at the moment, but there's no point in wishing that time away and going, I hope we end up the greatest team. The only way you can do that is by going, well, when next year comes around, we'll prepare properly, we'll go at it again, we'll enjoy every bit of it, we'll savour next year's All-Ireland if they are to win it, for example. But the idea that their heads are down the road thinking, we'll only be happy when we're the greatest team, it kind of nearly ruins the rest of it, really. I think if you don't savour the ones you're winning. So I think that's where they're at. Like, they're well aware they can go down as one of the greatest teams ever, and only time will tell. But I think they're just savouring it at the moment with the kind of, I suppose, in the back of their head that, right, lads, keep this train on track and who knows where it can go.
James, what about big match Hegarty here? 3-14 he's got now in All-Ireland finals, 1-5 he scored in the final. He had he's almost started a competition for himself for goal of the year between the Munster final and the goal that he scored in the All-Ireland final. I think there's probably a little bit more skill in how he had to set himself up in the Munster final, but that finish for the goal yesterday, there was nowhere really else to try and beat Murphy. It was just perfect into the top corner.
Murphy's too fast to try to get him at his near post, so you have to go try and get across his body so he's to bring the hurl across himself. But I was just really impressed. The pickup, no one talked about the pickup. The pickup was ridiculous. Yeah. I know they touched on Seamus Flanagan's touch, which I don't know was that even intentional. I'm not sure, but I think he kind of half tripped himself. But the pickup was unreal. Like, turning the hurl, the opposite direction, picking it up with the heel of the hurl or hurley, and then to show huge power to actually hand off Richie Reid. He gave him an actual physical rugby hand off and then pushed him out of his way. Like, Richie Reid is no small fella. Do you know what I mean? These are all conditioned hurlers. So for him to get the pickup, which is an execution of a skill that is extremely difficult in the midst of bodies everywhere, you know what I mean, and then to execute a goal at that across, in my opinion, the best goalie ever. Like, it's hard to draw words to it, do you know what I mean? But like, if you we were chatting off before this, like I was saying about possessions and how many possessions you actually influence a game, like, and for Garage Hegarty, like if you're getting 12 to 15 possessions in a game, you're probably having a positive influence for your team. Gareth Hegarty had 23, and that just I don't know, like for a forward, let's say, who doesn't be in his back, so but just to actually go and get the ball 23 times it's frightening. Do you know what I mean? It's frightening. So he's producing the goods day in, day out for Limerick, say, on the big days, or on final days, and look, credit him, fully deserved man of the match. And he's young. Like, I keep thinking of the team. I've written down here to say that they still have youth on their side. So like, they're not going away anytime soon, let's say. So when you have players like Gareth Hegarty, who may not produce the best performance the next day, then up steps Cal Hayes, and then he mightn't do it, then up steps Garen Glenn. It's just like a merry-go-round that they all have the clientele, and that's why it's so difficult for opposition teams with matchups, because like normally you put your best defender on their best forward, but they've got 4 or 5 forwards of equal capability, so it's very difficult for a team to nullify all of them. Do you know what I mean? That's why it's nearly an impossible task, and it's been proven to be an impossible task, because when teams get like Hugh Lawler did really well in Glen yesterday. To be honest, he did really well, but then Hegarty steps up. You know what I mean? Whereas then Finch and Brock did excellent on Hegarty 2 weeks ago, then Glen stepped. So it's difficult to nullify them entirely.
Yeah, before I ask you, Paul, about how some of the other Kilkenny defenders did, just the stats on the possessions, because Sean Flynn, the hurling analyst, sent these over literally just before we went to record. So Garrod Hegarty had 23 possessions during the game, which was far beyond anyone else during the fixture. 15 in the second half, 8 in the first half, and Garrod Hegarty was still shaking players off and scoring points in injury time at the end of the game. He was almost running as hard then as he was at the start. Next most possessions, no great surprise, because he got in a lot of ball going both ways, was Barry Nash. Then you had Declan Hannon on 13, and then on the far side you've got TJ Reid and Adrian Mullen with 12 possessions respectively. And Skehill said generally if a player gets into double digits of possessions during a game, that means you're pretty well involved. You're probably getting on the ball every 5-6 minutes you're making a meaningful contribution. But Garrod Hegarty, 23 possessions during the game, so he was very much dominant. The point on Hugh Lawler, because we were wondering who was going to pick up Gillane last week, Paul, and we were wondering was it going to be Mikey Butler that would be detailed on him, or whether Hugh Lawler would repeat the trick from 2019 and mark him again. Gillane ends up, I think, with 3 points in play at the end of the game, but generally Hugh Lawler did a very good job on him.
Yeah, Hugh Lawler had a really great game on Gillane, and I did think Mikey Butler would go with him, but Mikey Butler and Hugh Lawler are two different types of players. Like, Mikey Butler will, stick literally right beside you and go with you and flick and dispossess and so on. And again, that wouldn't be a bad option when you're marking Gillane. Hughie Lawler is something that maybe it's not lost, because people have seen him mark really top inter-county players, but he's incredibly fast, which is something that it's deceptive how fast he is. And why that's important is, he can afford to try and read the ball, and if he steps away a yard or two, and let's say the ball is moved out to the opposite side to where he was going to go, he can actually make that ground up on most inter-county forwards that he marks. And he was in a foot race so many times, and even late in the game he was in foot races with Gillane, that he dispossessed Gillane. I think of one ball in the second half, dropped down on the 21 out near the right corner back position, and he just broke the ball through in behind him, got it up and popped it off. Another one then straight in front of the goal, himself and Gillane were running, and he was toe-to-toe, and Gillane is fast, stayed with him and just dispossessed him, just flicked it, and knew there was another on-rushing Kilkenny defender to just pick up the ball. And that mightn't be glamorous stuff, but it's what you need out of your full back, that they're capable of dispossessing your players, staying with him at all times, especially when you're dealing with so much space in front of you. But he had an incredible game, and at the start, Gillane, if he didn't drop the hurl, going through on goal and he kicked the point, potentially there was a goal there yet. But Gillane's a dangerous forward. He's in Hurler of the Year form. He'll definitely, I'd imagine, be nominated in the top 3 certainly. So for the job that Hughie Lawler did to stem his influence, especially after the semi-final he had, he deserves huge credit for it. And look, he made the team of the year again last night for the Sunday game. So look, it was a great performance, and again, these are things that players, despite losing, can take away from it. At least look, he had an immense performance and created somewhat of a platform for Kilkenny to potentially go on and win the match.
Well, Paul, a few yards further out, and James already mentioned the fact that it was the inside forward line from Limerick who did a bit more of the scoring the last day, and the half forwards a bit quieter. Then those roles get reversed this time around, and it's 113 from the half forward line this time. Obviously 1-5 of that coming from Hegarty. They did a lot of damage. Why did it happen?
Well, you could see that it was quite apparent from the Limerick puckouts. They were coming quite narrow and then breaking out to the sides. And this is not something new that Limerick do, but they utilised it really well yesterday. And I think one of the things that worked really well was before, when we would have played Limerick, they were kind of the first team that we encountered that brought it into a ball in the middle, let's say in the centre-back position, and just broke out. But back then, once, let's say any team copped onto it or we copped onto it, we just stood on the outside and left the Limerick players in the middle, and then I'd stay right and someone would stay left, and you would then, that's negating then their tactic of breaking into that space. But what they're doing now is they're coming narrow, and Nicky Quaid is waiting, and he's not just striking the ball into that space. Before, Nicky might just strike it into the space, and it's the business of the Limerick player to win it. But if you look at Nicky Quaid from the camera behind the goal, he's looking, he's going, no, that's not the run I want, that's not the run I want, and he's looking, and he has 2 or 3 options nearly every time where, and it was evident yesterday, where he was looking, going, right, I have Kyle Hayes, Garrod Hegarty, I have whoever making runs here, Tom Morrissey, and I think the Kyle Hayes one, where Kyle Hayes got the point, was the best example of it. Like, it was just a massive foot race, and again, try and beat a foot race with those odds is no easy task. Kyle Hayes broke out to the side and the ball landed in front of him. It wasn't that a case as well also that Kyle Hayes had to go and catch the ball. So often the ball was bouncing in front of him, they could take it into the body, and then their physicality would take over. They could just push off a Kilkenny player, they could take them on. So they might seem like small differences in the way Limerick used to play it, but it maximises all the characteristics, the really strong characteristics the Limerick player had. Their physicality, like when they have the ball in the hand, like we saw it yesterday, Garrod, Hegarty and Kyle, they were literally just pushing players back, and then just, and in fairness, Walter Welsh did it similarly enough in the second half. I think he did it to Darragh O'Donovan where he got his point. Once these physical players, big players, have the ball in their hand and they have it in the chest, it's nearly too late then. You're nearly going to have to foul them at that stage. So, the half backline for Kilkenny did find this tough to deal with. And as you can see, look, 113 coming off it. Again, they did make a few moves. David Blanchfield coming on again did, I suppose, have a good effect on that, as in he got involved, he got a point as well. But a few of the Kilkenny backs, Paddy Deegan, I think popped up with 2 or 3 as well. So at times they seem to compete really well, and they competed really well in the air, but Limerick were just far too dominant in terms of the quality of ball they were getting. And the half back line, have to say that they did find it tough to deal with that. And I think the sideline as well, we're kind of looking to see what moves could they make to actually nullify it a little bit more.
Did they wait too long though? Like Blanchfield, I thought did quite well generally on Hegarty when he came on, but like Hegarty was obviously doing serious damage before that, and they kind of waited to about 10-15 minutes into the second half before making that change.
Yeah, and I think part of it, what may have happened, like you see Mikey Carey popped up with a point, I think Paddy Deegan got 2 or 3, Richie Reid was getting on a decent amount of the ball. I think any time where they potentially talked about maybe making a switch, someone might pop up with a point, or that Kilkenny might get 1 or 2 points, and they go, well, listen, hold on. I think it was something in that line, because the calls certainly were there to be made, and obviously the lads on the line recognised it by bringing on David Blanchfield. But yeah, I suppose hindsight being the great thing is maybe they would have felt that to lose out on the bit of going forward and getting the scores going forward, if they actually just tightened it up a small bit there in the half back line, they might have reaped a little bit more reward off it. But they're the decisions that had to be make during the game. And I suppose looking back on it, will the management look at that and say we could have made a few swaps? They probably will. No team wants to let a half forward line score 113 off them, but I think anytime Kilkenny looked like they were just about to get a foothold, Limerick just overpowered them again, and it just seemed to be that arm wrestle for the whole thing. And obviously the arm wrestle of Limerick won out in the end, but look, those are the calls that the lads on the sideline have to make, and maybe it was just a fraction too late by the time they made it. Yeah,
reactions were there from Limerick when both the goals went in the second half. James, to ask you about Nicky Quaid, because you've already been praising Murphy there a second ago about how good a goalkeeper he is and saying he's one of the best of all time. Nicky Quaid has to be one of the best distributors of a puck out of all time, because Kilkenny were not allowing them to get easy ball out with the puck outs. It was almost like there was a temptation to go, right, put the ball out a little bit longer. And Quaid's accuracy, helped by the fact that you've got players like Will O'Donoghue and the half forwards who are such good at winning their own possession anyway, and they make very good runs. But Nicky Quaid did an excellent job of putting the ball in the right places yesterday.
Yeah, but I'm not trying to belittle that, but what Murph was indicating there with the straight line with the boys making the runs, that makes the goalkeeper's job so much easier. Like, you don't put the ball where he is, you put the ball where he's going to be, which is way easier than putting the ball down top of a lad's throat, for efficiency levels, you could say. So the runs that Hegarty and Hayes were making, whereby they were doing double direction runs, like they can create separation, a bit like an NFL wide receiver. Do you know what I mean? Creating separation is the hard part, and once separation is created, it's nearly you're forcing the goalie to put the ball wherever separation is created. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, so it's like the outfielder forces our decision. Do you get me? So if you have a situation whereby there's guys and it's going to be 50-50, that stops you. Goal's not going to hit down there, so forget about that. But if you see something like a Garrett Hegarty creating 3 or 4 yards from a Paddy Deegan, you go, that's where I'm putting it. I'm putting it into space and he'll make it there. But like, then you have to go and do it and recognise that. So Nicky, it seems like the runs are being timed off Nicky's body language. So if Nicky's there with a long grip on the hurl and he's waiting, that's nearly signifying to the forwards, I'm not getting what I want here, lads, so change it. So move it again. Do you know what I mean? So that's why they change direction. Then he triggers it off. And if all else fails in, he might go with a short one. So like the execution is great, don't get me wrong, but his decision making is excellent as well. In terms of, he always, like 9 times out of 10, he seems to always find the right option, or choose the right option, should I say. Even with a balance between going short, going mid-range, going long, he seems to always be able to kind of play the game with the opposition forwards and backs, so they can never really get to grips with what he's going to do, you know. So like they can think, well, the last one went long, now it's going to go long again, then he'll go short and so on, and keep playing the game with them, you know? Whereas in Kilkenny's instance, I thought that when they go direct, they go very direct, right? But when they go short, it's like they're looking and going, right, now what's the plan? Yesterday, do you know what I mean? So when the ball went, mainly Mikey Butler got the ball mostly in the sharp workouts, you could say. It's like he got the ball and said, right, who am I giving this to? And there has to be a serious demand from your midfield, from your half back line, to go and take the ball to move on to the next phase. Whereas, and Limerick always do that. You could see it so evident, especially in the goal game when I was at it, where the ball go to Nash, and next thing you just see Will O'Donoghue, and you see O'Donovan charging through, give me the ball, you know, and then they get the ball, and then Hannon's coming through for a support run, and next thing the whole field is open up for a good ball into the glands of this world. And it's just, I didn't get that sense off Kilkenny yesterday. So what Limerick have produced from a puck-out perspective, yes, it's down to individual excellence, don't get me wrong, but it's off the training field. I know it was highlighted last night on the Sunday game, let's say, for a good bit, but it's the truth. Like, it's repetition, and players be on the same level and knowing exactly what the team requires. So if you do a short puck out, like, that cornerback can't just lump it long, you know, unless there's space up top. He has to get someone in the mid range, and it's bravery too, like, because it's hard to go and demand that ball when there's a guy up right on your back, let's say, and then to execute it, which they do so well. Like, their execution level at Limerick across the board is just fantastic. Like, the pressure that they can actually exude, let's say, and still execute the skills of the game is second to none. And that's kind of why they're a small bit of a level above. Yes, they're very well structured, they're very well coached, but their players themselves are so skillful and they can execute so well under pressure that it doesn't matter how hard you tackle them or how hard you go after them, they're still able to produce the goods.
Well, Paul, given that Kilkenny left their forwards in a very advanced position when it came to the Limerick puck out, it was a very conscious decision not to allow them to play a short puck out and come back out the field with it. Would there have been any temptation within the Kilkenny team to try and mix that up a little bit, given that the longer range puck outs were actually working out quite well for Limerick?
Yeah, I suppose there must have been, but it obviously was a game plan of Kilkenny that they prioritised that. Okay, we'll give them the simple ball. Like, we saw a lot of examples yesterday of Limerick where they got the ball literally on their own 14, and they it's not that they walked it out, but they worked it out so well that it was just seamless. So Kilkenny seemed to have looked at this and went, well, this longer ball seems like an area where we potentially could win a little bit more if we have our ducks in a row. We can actually stamp this out, and it gives our team a better chance of creating a platform going forward. So let's push up. And it was kind of a case they had to pick one or the other. And in the first half, you know, there was actually a few stages there. Paddy Deegan caught a great ball. Mikey Carey caught another great one. I think we got a score off it. They were getting the kind of ball they wanted to be delivered into the Limerick forward line. But eventually Limerick started changing it so that they got the type of ball they wanted delivered into the... And at that stage then, it was a case of Kilkenny had to decide, right, now that Limerick are delivering the type of ball that they want, do we step away from the game plan or do we staying up forward? And look, they stuck with staying up forward. I actually think that probably in this instance, because of the way they were set up at the backs, and the reason that they didn't want to actually just give Limerick that easy ball, I do probably think it maybe was the better option, because you're kind of damned if you do or damned if you don't with these Limerick lads. Like, you know, as if you sat right back on those lads, they have the ball carriers to just pop it out to them, and Barry Nash and all these lads, and suddenly they're starting and they're running at you, they're coming at you running. Whereas the option that Kilkenny went for was that, okay, well, we'll go, when they get the ball, at least they're facing away from our goal. But like, obviously we can see the result was that they were quickly able to turn that around into running at your goal. So Kilkenny Kilkenny said, right, this is what we're going to do, we're going to stick with it for good, bad or indifferent, this is what we're going to do, we're going to stick with it. And I think they realised that even stepping away from that game plan, you were just playing into the hands of Limerick in another way. So I think they realised they had to work cut out for them with the puck outs either way.
Yeah, it's one of those things, Skehill. I was reading a lot of the pre-match stuff on Saturday on the way to work, and the McAvoy had written in the Irish Examiner what felt like very blunt and very simple, but I entirely get the logic about what he was saying as a prediction, which was that if Limerick play to the way that Limerick can play, there's probably not a team out there right now to beat them. So if Limerick operate at their level, it's almost impossible to stop them. And in many ways, probably Kilkenny scoring the 2 goals, sticking with them, all of their frees going over, almost everything went right for Kilkenny, and yet Limerick just have that level to be a little bit ahead of them.
Yeah, and that's the reality of it. Now, that's not being disingenuous to any team or disrespectful. That's just reality, and that's what happens with the great teams. Like there's nearly like you remember when Barcelona when the the real pomp, let's say a few years back in the mid 2000s, like that's kind of the feel at the minute, that where they're just at a level that's just they've separated from everybody else. Now we can touch on the players and everything, but they're really well structured, really well organised, and I keep using the phrase they always have the answer. So I don't know, is that message just getting from the backroom team and management onto the pitch, or is this pre-rehearsed or pre-reviewed? It looked to me yesterday that they knew that Kilkenny were going to push up and their puck out, and hence they had the long ball rehearsed or fine-tuned to say, whereas Galway did the opposite. Galway went back to try and nullify the forwards, and they still worked it out perfectly well from the back. So it's just they just seem to have the answer, and we keep using these terms and cliches like the generation teams, but that's just reality. That's what they are. If they perform at the best of their ability, which seems to be what they're trying to do every day themselves, it's like they're challenging themselves, putting the main focus on themselves to produce the goods. They'll know then that they'll beat everyone. That's the truth. So if they keep performing at a level that they believe to be required or to be sufficient, should I say, no one's beating them. Nobody's beating them, because they have the clientele and they have the players. That if those players perform, just unfortunate for every other team at the moment, the opposition don't have the same number of top level players. And I was going back through my notebook there, Will, right?
Yeah, go on. This is the player ratings review.
No, I went back to the player ratings, and I just for interest, I said anyone who I gave a 9 to on both teams, did they operate at a 9 level yesterday? So I'm just looking at the Limerick team, and I was saying, okay, did Nicky operate at 9? Yes, he did. Sean Finn, 9, 8 or 9. Barry Nash, yes. Jeremy Burns, yes. I had Cian Lynch obviously didn't start. Kyle Hayes, yes. Garrett Hegarty, yes. Garen Glenn, yes. All operated 9s. You know what I mean? So they produce the goods when it matters most. So if those boys produce the goods on a big deal like that, no one can take them.
What did you have Declan Hannon down for pre-game? Was it an 8?
I had an 8, yeah.
I think he performed a bit better than an 8. Yes.
Oh, he did, yeah, 100%. Like he would you believe, like his success? Like it's amazing. Like he went into my, just unbeknownst to me, went into my hurler of the year bracket. It's just he's been so consistent, let's say, but he doesn't like do anything marvelous. He just does the simple things really well, and he's a vital cog in that team. He's like the the glue around everybody else. Let's say he's just a guy that defends really well, and his possession count. I'd love to see. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I'd love to see when he gets possession of the ball, how much of it is actually turned over. How much does he actually give away? I'd say it's in the very, very low percentages. I'd say he's even less than 5%, because he seems to be so efficient on the ball, and every ball he strikes seems to go to some lad's hand. So he's just he's a brilliant platform for teams, for his own team to go forward, and a good leader by all accounts.
Yeah, that's one of the things, Murph, when it comes to Hannon. He does so much of the kind of quiet clean-up work remarkably well, and then he'll bring out the ball and play very good ball into his teammates and keep the ball ticking over. There was one point where I thought was kind of vintage Hannon yesterday. It was early in the first half, where the ball came down and he got absolutely swarmed, and it looked like he was going to be pushed out towards the sideline. Still, he managed to shield the ball and actually get out. He's got that bit of strength, and he's even got that little bit of speed when needed, when players were putting pressure onto him, and Hannon made sure he wasn't going to get turned over.
Yeah, he does, and again, it's very deceptive. He won a great free as well in the first few minutes as well. Maybe it's the same instance we're talking about there, where he just, he didn't foul the ball, held onto it, he was being surrounded, but he didn't panic for all the world. He was still looking for an out with the ball, and what Declan Hannon is brilliant at doing, and it seems to be a thing of all Ireland finals, is this driving forward through the centre back position at really important times in the game, and you hear the crowd lifting, as in they came out with a few balls at that stage. Pretty sure he popped up with a score yesterday, still a whirlwind in my head, yeah. And it was this typical Declan Hannon score of running up through the middle, and the crowd nearly expected at this stage. But because you think back to his art school reach days, where he was just he was the big name in the country, he was the centre forward at the time, and he was being lauded as this incredible hurler, which he is. But now what we see him very much at the moment is he's the fulcrum of that back line. Like, of all these lads, we talk about the great hurlers that they have. Similar enough to the way Cian Lynch holds it together in the forwards at centre forward and makes all the plays. Declan Hannon seems to do this for the backs, and then when needed just steps up and goes up the pitch, drives forward and nearly resets the team again. There was a few stages there, I think even in the second half, where again there was a ball, Kilkenny were driving in towards the Limerick goal, broke down, and next thing, who comes out with it? Only Declan Hannon running out, and straight away there was just an eruption in the stadium that he came out with the ball. So like, he just does all the simple things so well, but then when it's necessary, he does the captain's role of stepping up and just goes, right, I'll take this by the scruff of the neck, and doesn't do anything absolutely outlandish or anything, just steps up, ball in the hand, pops it over the bar, or gives off a really good ball that sets up a score and settles the team again. So like, I don't know what more you really want from a captain than those qualities.
And James, nice bit of leadership, and I know this veers into sentimentality, but at the end of the game, to bring Cian Lynch up to be the first ever guy to lift the Liam McCarthy while wearing a cap, and he had his crutches with him as well. But like, given that Lynch was fighting back for so long to try and come back from the hamstring injury originally, to get that knock in training during the week that KOs him out of the final, which would have been a huge blow to him, to bring Lynch up to actually be part of the presentation shows that little bit of leadership to, pass a bit off to a very important other member of the panel as well.
Yeah, because I'd say probably the last 3 or 4 months for Cian Lynch has been nothing short of mental torture. That's what happens when you get long-term injury, like, because you're missing out on everything. Fine weather is coming, the ball is speeding up. You trained all winter, let's say, to get to this stage, and then you get injured. And there's nothing you can do about it, only do your rehab as best you can, right? And then when you go through that long, hard road of getting back from an injury, then to go and suffer another one in a different body part entirely is just, it's nearly soul destroying when you think of it as coming from an Ireland final. So I can imagine Declan Hannon went from probably only after the game, nothing pre-rehearsed, you can be sure of that, only after the game. And I'd say probably Cian Lynch maybe denied it for the first couple of requests. I'd say probably that strikes me as the type of fella he is. He said no, he doesn't want any fuss, like. But I'd say Declan Hannon just probably caught him and brought him up. Nice touch, and like, that would be appreciated for Cian. I'd say Cian Lynch would appreciate that gesture. It kind of shows to me like they're a galvanised group, if that makes sense. They're a galvanised group, and they seem to be very kind of for each other, if that makes sense. Which is terribly hard to stop in a winning team. Do you know what I mean? I wish they weren't. I wish they weren't, to be honest. I wish they hated each other. But look, they're ticking all the boxes. They have everything going for them, let's say, and they have a good leader in Declan Hannon. Like, he doesn't. He performs through action. Like, he doesn't strike me as a man who was tons and tons of verbals in dressing rooms. He just kind of leads from the front and is there for everyone. So look, as I said to you earlier on, it's an embarrassment riches to have.
I was just thinking though as well, when they actually brought up, like, think back to earlier in the year where that motion was put forward that dual captains and 2 lads can't go up and collect the cup.
Yeah.
But like, imagine, in fairness, that was enforced yesterday, Cian Lynch. You want to be a brave man now to walk down and deny Cian Lynch.
You got a belt with a crutch.
But like, when you think about it, like, I mean, we talked about that earlier in the year, like, that motion that was put forward, which just seemed to be, I don't know who put that forward, but like, imagine we missed out on that moment yesterday, which was a great moment, all because of, I don't know why you wouldn't allow 2 people to collect the cup, but it's just funny how times move on, that a rule can be in for a few weeks and then disappear completely.
Don't get started on rules, Murph.
I think the official reason that was given for that rule, by the way, was to clean up the presentation of cups. I think was what was in the deciding for it. I couldn't believe it at the time, because a lot of people thought it was primarily because of COVID, this idea of kind of keeping separation when people were going up to get the cups. But no, it was all about apparently cleaning up the idea of a presentation. It's
a strange term, cleaning it up. It wasn't getting out of hand. It wasn't getting messy, and dozens of people going up collecting the cup. So I still don't buy that.
Nah, who cares? Like as a neutral watching on, who gives a crap if 2 people are lifting the cup as opposed to 1? We also had Michael O'Leary 98 in contact on the Instagram, and I'll give this to you, Paul, because look, it's not the deciding factor within the game, but I saw a few people commenting about this, and I did feel sometimes that maybe Kilkenny weren't entirely getting the rub. But the idea that as a neutral, Michael says he was watching, were Kilkenny finding it a bit harder to get frees during the second half, particularly?
I don't. I think it'd be very hard to say that they were finding it hard to get frees, if I'm honest. There was ones, of course, when like I was in the stadium and you're seeing it, you're like, you're on edge. You're there going, that should be a free. There certainly was ones that were on the borderline, but I don't think any Kilkenny supporter was coming away from the game yesterday going, we were hard done by. Like, because I'm sure if I sat down and you talk to any Limerick person who was sitting there, I'm sure there's frees in their head that they thought were frees. I'm trying to think. There's nothing that overly jumps out at me. I know there was one in the second half. I think TJ was after winning the ball, and I think, you know, Limerick were doing great swarming, and I think at one stage it was like, oh, that was maybe a little bit too much, you know, as in if a free was blown, I don't think many people would have argued. But overall, no, I don't think you can't be hard on Colm Lyons in it, because I think the best example is just at the moment there's nothing overly jumping out at me. Whereas if I go back to even maybe the Leinster final or something at this stage, I could probably pick out one or two where like, oh, that was a bit harsh on either side or whatever. So considering with the intensity the game was played yesterday, and look, again, I suppose the fact that there were only 2 points in it, maybe people look at these a little bit more, say if we got that free or we got that free, that would have tipped the scale for us. But no, look, as a Kilkenny person, I don't have any begrudges over the decisions. There's nothing that jumps out at me where I could say, Jesus, we were really hard done by there. There was no big blatant penalty calls. There was nothing like that. I think Colm Lyons tried to ref it as best he could, and try to keep the element of physicality in it as well. So yeah, look, hopefully that shows my unbiasedness now going forward.
No cards either. Like, it's one of those things they always say when it comes to a match scale that a referee probably not want to be talked about the next day. When you think about it, I don't think there's any huge arguments against the way that Colm Lyons refereed the game. There were no massive contentious decisions, no cards being flashed. Generally, we're talking today about, you know, the skill. We're talking about the goal that was scored by Hegarty particularly. We're not talking about really anything that happened from the officials at all.
Well, don't get me started now, Will.
Like, go on, you get started. So
umpires, lads.
All right, go on, yeah.
Umpires, come on. Like,
I was behind Gerard Hegarty's one now, and I was going, even as I was saying to you off air there, I was beside a lad from Cork and a lad from Leitrim, and they were going, what was that? What was wrong with that one?
I struggle to understand, to comprehend how they're getting these decisions wrong, like, you know. Because, as I said before, football, I get it. Football, it curls, you know, it's a big ball. It goes very, very high above the post, say. But a sliotar 9 times out of 10 carries a true line. So I'd be looking at umpires saying, why don't you just position yourself behind the goalie? Because if a goalie's facing, let's say, out to the 10 wing forward, get yourself behind him, and then you'll be able to make a fine decision. But some of their position is fucking cash. Like, I don't know where they're setting up or how they're thinking they're going to look at the ball the way it is. And it's like, Hawkeye, grand if it's close, but there's Hawkeye decisions where they were 2 foot inside the post, and you're saying to yourself, Lord above, like, what are they looking at? But yeah, that's my rant about the umpires. But in general, Colm Lyons do well.
Well, I was wondering, Skehill, when it came to Hawkeye, the Hawkeye operators were probably delighted because I think the first one that went up was about 2 or 3 feet inside the post, and all week we would have been wondering about the technology working. You're thinking, well, that's the easiest Hawkeye decision we're ever going to see.
I was expecting a football to arrive onto the screen and say, if this happens now, call the whole thing off, we'll all go home.
You football on the brain no more.
Shane Welch's point was just going to get the go ahead there, the taw.
Yeah, I'd love to know. I'm not going in on the umpires, but I am actually. But I'd love to know. I'd love to know. I say, how are they trained? You know, for positions. Is there training for umpires? I haven't a clue.
I don't know, but I think there is a bit of a hangover though from the fact that generally the umpires are club mates or friends of the referee who tend to be like extremely loyal to them and go around as their umpires all the time. Maybe it should be a case of having trained umpires who are perfect neutrals doing the posts at big games.
Yeah, I wonder. Like, even if I take my own experience in club games, like it's an absolute rarity that a umpire gets a decision wrong. So I'm saying, where is the disconnect between club and county games? Like, and you can imagine it's the same instance, let's say, in club games whereby 9 times out of 10 the 4 umpires are club mates or personal friends. So that you'd imagine they don't get too much training. They just come along, and it's their experience of the sport, you could say. But like, I cannot actually think of an instance in the last number of years where an umpire in any of our games got anything wrong. And there's been some close calls. Now, don't get me wrong, I help them. If there's a close one, I'll kind of sway them a small bit. Like Murphy was doing yesterday, he was waving everything wide. I didn't know what was the score.
Yeah. I saw it during the week there where they were saying, GA were saying that they were going testing Hawkeye, obviously after last weekend, they were going testing it. So I was thinking they were going to need a few lads to go up and strike a few wides up in Croke Park, so I was raging I didn't get the call there. I was a perfect candidate there to start slapping wides until 16. But they must be looking for either or. I can do either, James, it doesn't matter. I kicked the wide into Hill 16 last week, so I'm all for the wides in any sport, so that's grand.
Rigorous testing, they claimed. I was just thinking, Skehill, would you ever been tempted to do what Comerford was doing? Did you see what he was doing with trying to make the post sway during the Shawnee O'Shea score?
Evan Comerford, is it? I was a devil for hitting the post, hitting the crossbar. Right. And then every ref just said, just stop, just get out of it. Yeah. So then I just stopped. I kind of grew out of it, to be honest with you. No, but the right tricks I have now would be throwing out a bad ball, let's say, or throwing out a wet ball, or having a few trying to put them off, let's say, waving hurlers. But moving the crossbar was the first. It's one thing in football you can do that, but in a hurling game, the ball comes in so fast, you mightn't get your arse back into the goal quick enough. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't chance that now.
And you might well have pulled it too far to one side and maybe allowed the point to go over too. We talked about Richie Hogan last week, Paul, and about the fact that he hadn't a game time, and he came on in almost exactly the circumstance you had mentioned. You thought a point or two down, the game is in the mix, it's going towards the last 10 minutes. That's the time that Cody will bring Hogan on. He got a great reception when he came on, which is probably the respect of a former Hurler of the Year, and both sets of fans gave him a great reception when he came on. Scored a point to level the game, but then probably didn't really feel enough of the sliotar after that.
No, he didn't, and it was look, as I said, I believe that he would come on, let's say, when Kilkenny were 2 points down, because he's the type of player that can just turn a game. He's he's a very intelligent player, and it's not simple to come on into any match, never mind an All-Ireland final. But when he came on, the first possession to be a ball out in the sideline, and it was a kind of a typical Richie Hogan score, and as soon as he struck it, it was just straight over the bar. Draw the game as well. You couldn't ask for a more pressured shot. So yeah, but that I suppose that was it. After that, then it was just the positioning of where were they going to get him onto the ball. He was kind of locating himself in towards the goal a little bit more as well. But look it was great to see Richie coming on. And again, I suppose I saw he went over. I think he went on to Mike Casey kind of straight away. And you see Mike Casey coming over and shaking hands with him straight away. Look, I know that's the type of thing the lads would do, but I think Richie kind of has the respect of so many defenders and stuff. He's a likeable fella, and you're going to get a tough battle out of him. But it was great to see the reception he got. He did have an impact when he came on. I'm sure he would have liked to get on a few more balls, but I was walking down to Croke Park yesterday and I bumped into a few people, a few club mates and a few other people as well, and it just seemed to be the question of, people were asking, will Richie start? This is the way they were looking at it. But it was great to see him get on anyway. I know the circumstances didn't work out as we would have liked, but it just goes to show he didn't get chances during the year, and the one chance he gets is coming down the home straight of an All-Ireland final. He pops up, gets a point to draw the game, and anything could happen from there. And certainly with a few more other balls given to him, he would have been really a banker to maybe get a point or even one of these typical Richie Hogan goals. So it was great seeing he did have the impact. But look, I suppose no more can be said. Sometimes look, you're coming into a really good Limerick backline as well, so you're not going to get everything your own way either. So the fact he got a great point, I'm sure he would have been happy with his impact yesterday.
He has a decision to make now at this stage, James. Game time has been limited over the last 2 years, particularly limited this season, as we mentioned last week. It's hard to give that full slog to be around to maybe just be an impact player for 1 or 2 games a season. He has probably a big choice to make this winter. Yeah,
he does. The thing about it is, he looked in fine condition yesterday. I genuinely thought over the last couple of weeks that he had a long-term injury because we hadn't seen anything of him. And I'll admit this, I do have a soft spot for Richie in terms of the respect I have for him as a hurler. And I know, Murph, some people might look at you, let's say, he's your club mate, and you might say there's a touch of a biased opinion, but everything you say is 100%. I can tell you hand in heart, if I saw him coming from the start of the game, you'd be saying that needs watching. Do you know what I mean? Because I think he has it all, to be honest. Low ball, high ball, and he's a great thinker. He's one of these forwards that, let's say, you have to keep as the play is developing, you have to keep your eye on him because he moves into pockets of space and demands the ball. So I personally, now I don't know the circumstances fully, but in terms of his condition, he looked great. His touch looked fucking really good yesterday, as you can tell. So I'm struggling just to understand how he didn't start the game and how he hasn't featured more in the year. So from his own perspective, when he's playing well, by all accounts, from the information I have, right, and he's playing well, it's not from you, Murphy, either, don't worry. And he's in good condition and he's injury free. That's probably hard for him to deal with if he's not getting the minutes. Because if you're a top inter-county hurler like he is, and he's producing the goods in training and they're not getting the reward of the game time, then he needs to make a life decision. Do I really want to put in the time and effort and the headspace? A lot of people forget about that. The headspace of being it's not like mental turmoil sometimes when you're not playing in and out of a team and you're trying to wonder what's gone wrong, etc. Maybe he's just best he moves himself out of that situation. But again, that's not for me to say. I still think he should be back next year and he should be a big part of the Kilkenny squad. But he'd probably look at his own situation. Professionally, what does he do, Murph, actually?
Well, he was working in Croke Park there. I think he finished up lately enough. He was the commercial manager in Croke Park, but he's doing a master's in Trinity at the moment in marketing. So Look, I'd say he has a lot in terms of work. He's a busy man, like you know, he has a lot on his plate, and like he's an ambitious fella as well. So like you know, there's potential there. I know Richie to a certain extent, but like you know, Richie can keep his cards close to his chest, as I'm sure a lot of people do in terms of their work life and what their plans are for the future. But like you know, that man, he has plans for his work life as well. So like as we see, lots of players maybe step away because of work, because of whatever. So there's potential there that Richie might go, yeah, absolutely. But I don't know, and I don't know, like he may have. I'm sure he's thought about it at this stage, but I'm sure he's just enjoying, I suppose, the wind down at the moment with the lads and having a few drinks at the moment. And yeah, sure, look at here. I mean, I think once you get to a certain age in hurling, every year you're kind of deciding, or football or whatever it is, you're deciding, will I go again the next year? So I'm sure Richie's had these thoughts, but look, the next few weeks will show what his thoughts are for next year.
Murph, like we've been lauding TJ Reid, and look, I think it's perfectly understandable why we've been lauding him too. Weirdly, it's probably the best performance from a forward who didn't score from play within a game, because all his points came from frees. But the amount of primary possession that he won, like the amount of times the hand went up in the air and TJ Reid came back down with the ball, and it either resulted in winning a free which he popped over himself or creating a good chance for a teammate. We spoke about it last week. He's 35 later this year. Like Henry in 2012, I think was 33 at that stage. So TJ's now older than Henry was, and we were all lauding Henry for, you know, one of the great performances towards the end of his career in that All-Ireland final. TJ Reid is still operating at a hell of a level. Like in actual probably Hurler of the Year conversation at the end of the year at nearly 35 years of age.
Yeah, and the only thing is, like we were talking about it coming home yesterday, like we were just saying, like, you know, it's probably the common conversation that lots of people have, and no one's having it with the Limerick lads because they're all under 30. But like, you know, I was having it with my wife coming home in the car going, you know, who will stay on or who might go, because again, just lads are, you know, past the 30 mark, some lads there. And the only reason I would say that TJ would stop is because I was saying he's 35 at the end of the year. But I had to remind myself that that's not a reason for him to stop. Like, you know, as in, when you see how he's working there, how he's operating on the pitch, there is no reason I can see why TJ would stop. So again, it's this I suppose the stigma of age. Age isn't the reason you stop. Again, it's the body. Can the body go again? Can the mind go again? Do you want to go again? So those are the things TJ Reid has to ask himself. We talked about it last week as well, the condition he's in. He's looked after himself so well that he can go again next year. So I think the only reason that people will ask, will TJ go again this year, is because lots of people by his age have retired at this stage because they're just not able to go. TJ will be able to go next year, and it's only up to TJ again, no more than Richie. It's only up to TJ to answer that himself, whether he wants to go again, or whether he decides, you know what, I've given a huge amount to this and the body is in a great condition. Let's not go to a stage where maybe I pick up a few injuries or whatever it is. So again, that's one for TJ to answer. But from me, and I think for everyone looking on yesterday, there's no indications there as to why he shouldn't play next year.
No, I look scale at Zlatan Ibrahimovic at 41 years of age signing another contract with AC Milan. You look at the nick that Cristiano Ronaldo was in at 37, I think, when it comes around to February. TJ Reid is still operating at a very, very high level. You know, touch wood, the guy doesn't pick up any kind of injuries along the way. But if you're TJ Reid, you're probably thinking, I can go for a few more years, not just maybe one next year. There's probably a couple of more years left in TJ Reid.
Well, I think his professional life helps him as well. You know, and you consider that he runs his own gym below, so like he's got the. I would say he hasn't got a rigorous kind of job to say, or a tough job to say, that from a physical perspective, and he has a facility where he can train himself. He's in great nick. He's in super nick. There's no reason, like normally with and I have to say with Henry, you could nearly see a small bit of a decline coming in as in his last year. He was coming on and you're saying, right, that's probably going to bow out. He nearly forced the issue to say, well, with TJ, there's no decline. And if there's no decline, and if the body is good, that's two major elements that will tell you to keep going. So I don't see a world where TJ's not playing next year. I don't see a world where he's not playing the year after, let's say, barring a drastic issue of an injury, as you just noted, let's say. So, like, yeah, he'll be back next year. And I hope himself and Richie are both back next year.
Well, I'll give you both a shout on this. Where does this final rank of ones in recent years? For me, it's definitely the best final since 18 straight away, because we've had kind of one-sided events in 19, 20, 21. Probably going back to the three drawn finals, in my head at least, of 2012, the Clare and Cork game 2013, the drawn game, and like 2014, which is probably the best final I've ever seen. Since then, is this the best final that we saw yesterday?
Yeah, I'd say it has to be, really. Trying to think back now on the rest.
I know James will look back fondly on like Galway and Waterford, which was an entertaining contest as well in 2017, but I don't know.
I'll
You
tell
have your thought there.
I'll tell you straight. I would like in terms of the game. Let's say the actual game. Yes, from a supporter or from a player perspective, 17 was magic, and 18 was shit, right? But in terms of the actual games themselves, like 14. It's hard for me to look past 14 the first day.
Yeah,
it's very hard for me. As the contest 12 the first day, I'd imagine was a good game because it was the first drawn final in some I think was it 50 years or something crazy like that.
Yeah, they've been a long time.
Crazy, like, so as it's probably a spectacle for the neutral and for supporters alike, I'd say 12 was a very, very exciting contest. So was 13 towards the end. But in terms of a game, in terms of everything that it had, 14 for me was shit hot. I have to say, in fairness, in fairness it was.
So is the best one then? I'm not ranking it with 14, but maybe the best one since 14.
I would say so. Yeah. It has to be. In terms of a spectacle, it was absolutely brilliant. And the amount of scores, like I was saying to you, I was sitting beside two lads. One was from Cork, one was from Leitrim. And I don't know what stage in the match it was. Maybe, Will, it was like you were saying, there was, I think, 4 scores in a minute and a half. But the two lads were sitting beside me and they're like, they're not fucking missing. They're not hitting wides. Like, what's going on? And they could see the hits that were going in. Like, they could just see that, there was nothing easy out there. Like, there's lads going and getting hit hard, turning. You had a fraction of a second to have a look at the goals, pop it over the bar. And it was just, like, it was enthralling yesterday. I'd say what 2014 just about has over it is there was a little less structure, I suppose, in 2014 in terms of there was a lot more. I saw someone had it up a clip today because this conversation was up, and I think there was about a minute and a half of it was just a slobber knocker of lads driving the ball out. Someone thinks they're free, they go to clear a ball, they get hooked. Someone's in on the ground, they rise it up, they get shouldered, the ball drop, and it just went back and forth. So I think that's why, from a spectacle point of view, but that's been very hard on the game yesterday as well because it was a brilliant game, and I think we kind of just have to be grateful that we got such a great game because there's nothing more disappointing when you tee up such a great match and then nothing. It's a dead rubber and something, it just falls flat. So it's brilliant that we're sitting here today talking, saying, is it up there with one of the greatest matches we've ever seen?
Well, James, I'll give you the floor on Hurler of the Year. We're going to pick our team of the year next year, and we're going to do a more nuanced, or next week. Next year.
Come on.
Next week.
We're going to really take our time. I know Skehill likes his lists and stuff like this. We're going to go in January.
I can only imagine how full the notebook would be if we came back for episode 23 on the first week of January.
He'd have a new team of the year every week anyway. No hurling being played. Lads, I had to go back there and change that. Lads, had to change.
Well, Skehill, you tweeted, I think, pretty much at full time in the game about your Hurler of the Year, and you were going for Diarmaid Byrnes. Like, no great surprise. I'll let you make the argument for him, but like Diarmaid Byrnes scored more in the championship this summer than Patrick Horgan. 36 points from wing back.
Yeah, I actually didn't know how much he scored, to be honest. But he, like, what constitutes a Hurler of the Year, right? So it's doing their job above everybody else, to a level above everybody else, and he has just been a prime example of that, let's say. And everyone will look at the scores, and that's great. The scores are really good, they're excellent, don't get me wrong, but they're scores in intense pressure from long distances, let's say. But also, he's a savage defender. Like, people, I don't think they give enough appreciation to the man for the way he's able to defend, and he's high fielding. He's like when you're looking out and you see Tommy on one wing and JJ on the other wing, you're going, shit, which where do I go with this ball? Do you know what I mean? Because when you put it down high, it's going to stick to his hand. And the same with Byrnes. It's a rarity now. It probably has happened, but it's a rarity he gets outfielded, so and outran because he's strong. He's obviously rangy in the air. He can catch anything. He's fast. You know what I mean? And he's got 2 good sides, and he can strike the ball a country mile. You know what I mean? And when you piece all that together, and he does it to the best of the level that anybody else has produced this year, he's my Hurler of the Year. And but again, if you give me a counter argument for somebody else, if you said Barry Nash, it would be very hard to argue. If you said Declan Hannon, it's hard to argue. Do you know what I mean? Because the margins are so fine when you get to an award of this prestige, because the people we're talking about obviously have produced the goods day in, day out. And just for him, for consistency, I think he's my main guy.
Paul Murphy, the floor is yours to counter.
No, I'm not going to counter anything there.
I thought you were going to go for Nash.
No, I tell you, like, if you asked me before throwing yesterday, who will be the 3 nominations for Hurler of the Year? And again, Skehill said it there, fine margin. This is really fine margins with all these lads. But I would have said the 3 nominations would have been Barry Nash, Aaron Gillan and Adrian Mullen. That's where I thought it was. But but Diarmaid Byrnes, I'm talking like a hair's breadth from being within those 3. So there was very fine. But the influence he had in the game yesterday, I'm not being completely just swayed by yesterday. He was in the conversation all year in terms of his performances. But then just after seeing yesterday, even the score he got in the first half there, puck out, comes down, catches it, drives forward, nothing on the mind, only put it over the bar. Like, he's just such an influential player. So, and like, I'll be honest, I really want to lean towards Barry Nash or something. Like, he's been incredible. And I think after the Munster final, if you asked me who Hurler of the Year was, I would have said Barry Nash. It's so, like, these are really fine marriages, and we're very lucky to have, you know, so many people that are putting their names forward for there. You know, after the semi-final there against Clare, Adrian Mullen, you were looking at him going 5 points from play. You know, I think set up another 3. You're going, Jesus, that's serious stuff there as well. But as a cornerback, I was busting for Barry Nash there. Like, you know, give me a reason, or Mikey Butler, someone give me a reason I can put you on the Hurler of the Year. But no, I think you have to give it to Jim Burns. He's been excellent, like, you know, and he's just such a great hurler to watch. He's a powerhouse, and like you said, to be scoring more than Patrick Horgan and you're at right half back, that's incredible.
But it's the sign of the times as well, like that. We're talking about backs and the jobs they do nowadays. Like, by my count now, another list. I could be wrong here. There's only been 5 backs in the last 27 years Hurler of the Year.
Yeah. And the last one I did a quick check before we come on was Tommy Welch, and you have to go back over 10 years for that. Yeah,
you have to go Tommy in 09, you have Sean Oak in 04, JJ, Brian Corcoran and Brian Lohan. Back as far as 95. So
I don't think there's ever been a fullback Hurler of the Year in terms of someone from the full back line.
Lohan?
So that would have
been Brian Lohan, 95. He was the first.
Oh, sorry, it was Lohan. That was it. Oh yeah, you're right too. Yeah.
But like, my point is, let's say it's like a sign of the times that the backs are kind of in the conversation more and more. It's just the way the game has gone, let's say. But yeah, like, we're talking about potentially 3 backs in the nominees when you talk about Declan, Nash and Jeremy Burns. But yeah, who's yours, Will?
Yeah, I'm going towards, you know, I'm actually going to use your metric to a certain extent here on Burns, because I was having to think about this last night when the Sunday game were picking it. And it's like the only game I can think of where he hasn't been an 8 or a 9 out of 10 pretty much across the year in the championship was the Tipperary game, where the half-back line in general for Limerick were a little bit shaky that day. But, you know, not exactly taking out of the conversation of anything. I think we actually said at the time that up until then, Dermot Burns had looked the most impressive player at the first 2 or 3 rounds of the championship. And then after that, he's been Mr. Consistent and such an important player. Like, Limerick gets so many scores from that half-back line. It's sometimes overlooked, you know, when we talk about teams being shut down, and this idea that, say, like, if you're going against Clare, if you can get a handle on that Clare half-forward line, you've got a good chance of stopping them and so on. In the case of Limerick, if their half-forward line has a day where they misfire, say the full forward line aren't getting a huge amount of scores, their half-back line will generally contribute quite a few scores during the game, and Burns has been chief among them. And yeah, I think his defending has been a little bit underrated. And it was interesting to hear Davy Fitzgerald last night talking about the fact that maybe he wasn't the most natural defender when he was finding his way into the position at wing back, but he's been working on it continually. And I think you got to respect that. No one's cleaned out Dermot Burns this season. He's been really, really good. So I think for that, you go from, I was definitely edging towards Aaron Gillan for quite a bit of the year. And I think it's only fair enough that Aaron Gillan will be majorly in the conversation. Like, even though we talked about Hugh Lawler having a good game, Gillan still had quite a few meaningful contributions during the game in the All-Ireland final. And I take Murph's point as well. There is a certain amount of weighting towards an All-Ireland final. So Burns just had a really good semi-final and a really good final. And that has to help his argument when it comes to winning it as well. So guaranteed to be on the All-Star team. And I think there's a very good chance that Burns wins. First defender since 2009, which is a hell of an achievement, because nearly every year we're drawn towards the star midfielder or forward or whoever does most of the scoring naturally tends to win Hurler of the Year.
Yeah. Who's going to be Hurler of the Year? That's a tough one to decide now at the moment.
It's a tough one now, yeah. I think Cian Kenny might just pip that because he's been starting and because he had a good semi-final and different things. Like, again, Colin O'Neill, like, I think I picked him out after the Munster final. For young Hurler of the Year. So that's probably a tougher one in terms of a front runner there as to who'll actually get it. But it's probably, look, it's between the two boys now. But
so if you consider the league, Murph, you got to give Colin O'Neill a very good chance as well. Like, he hurled very consistently throughout the year.
See, I don't, to be honest, if I'm to say who I think the All-Star committee will give it to, I don't know, does the league really come into it? That's just me. That's not me saying that it shouldn't. I think it should, absolutely.
It's definitely weighted down, but I think when it comes to young hurler, it should be maybe more of a consideration than hurler.
Yeah, it should. We often just forget about the league, really. Now, maybe not so much now because, it's so condensed and it's a little bit closer, but oftentimes different players have had savage leagues, and not that you're expected that just carries over and you have a very average championship and it doesn't count, but the closer you get to the I suppose business end of the year, that's where obviously you get more points for your performances. But it is going to be a tough one. That's a very hard one to call, young hurler dear. Who do you think, Skehill?
It's a tough one because normally you'd always say it's number 21, that was the rules of old, let's say. And I'm actually struggling to think now who produced standout performance day in the out at that age. Like, I hadn't even thought of Kilkenny, to be honest. I hadn't been thought of him. Connor was my guy up to a point to say, but it's and if he gets it, I won't argue it, because like he's had positive impacts whether he started or come on. I just think that no one has really, I won't say stood out.
No, they haven't.
That's probably but there's been no 20-21-year-old that has been head and shoulders above the rest. Like, you know, Owen Cody, like say, when he won in 2 years, like he was different gravy. Do you know what I mean? He's the obvious choice, to say, or the Conor Whelan would say, whatever. Yeah. But this year, like if Conor Whelan gets it, if Kilkenny gets it, if there's a bolter from somewhere, I'm not going to argue.
Yeah, I think they're the two leading contenders. Something we can have a think about maybe a little bit more ahead of next week. And if anyone wants to get involved in the YouTube comments, by all means, fire it in. But yeah, I think as well, when it comes to just the sheer amount of games, like again, I was thinking about it last night and just trying to, you know, tease out other players that could fit into these teams, purely because, you know, on the Sunday game team of the year, they put Tony Kelly into corner forward, which meant that Shane O'Donnell could be in there with the two Limerick boys in the half forward line, and it's a way of making sure that Tony Kelly and Shane O'Donnell are both in the team, rather than maybe having to make a hard decision. And then I'm thinking Conor Lehane maybe goes out with the championship a bit too early, despite how good Lehane was during the year, to be considered into the team. Maybe the fact that Lee Chin was injured at the start and Wexford didn't go beyond the quarter-final, it makes it difficult to pick them. There really is no exact science when it comes to picking these all-star teams or, you know, teams of the year.
No, there's not. And I think the one thing I just don't like is just if you try and stretch it too far and another player loses out because you're trying to accommodate another player. Like, if there's tough calls to make, there's tough calls. And I don't think anyone's going to begrudge if a lad played a nice bit at centre forward and you move him to right half forward or whatever it might be. But I think when you move lads through the lines, that's when it gets a little bit wishy-washy for me, like, you know. And I appreciate, like, you know, it does make for potentially a stronger team, but like, again, it's, you have to go back to the positions. Like, you know, we don't see it happening in other sports, and not that we go, oh, what are other sports doing, but I like to kind of stick a little bit more to the tradition of, well, if you play it at least in the line, grand, move a lad left or right, fine, but when you're moving them through lines to accommodate other lads and other players are losing out, I wouldn't be a fan of that now.
Yeah. One other topic before we go, lads, and that's the managerial merry-go-round that has happened during the week just gone by, which is probably going to result in Liam Cahill being the Tipperary manager. He may well even be proposed by the time that people listen to this pod or get a chance to watch it. It looks like it's going to be fairly imminent over the next few days. But Colm Bonnar removed from his position, I think is the fair way to put it. I know some people even had it down as sacked after 1 year, when he felt that he was going into a 3-year programme and it was about bringing through some of those players that maybe hadn't got opportunities. We spoke throughout the year about how unlucky Tipperary were with injuries on the back of some key retirements. I was then watching Pádraig Mara, who was one of those key players that retired last year, and got the feeling when he was on OTBM that he was basically thinking that there was an understanding among some in Tipperary. And I know from talking to some friends, their feeling was that the championship campaign was disappointing and that they felt that they didn't particularly want Colm Bonnar to be in charge next year. But what's been a fairly universal feeling from Tipperary fans and people outside there, James, is that it seems that even with the statement, with the way everything was handled, it doesn't look great on a legend of Tipperary hurling, a guy who's been a games development officer within the county, who was a stellar hurler for the team, who was realising an ambition to manage the side and was probably dealt a poor enough hand. To get a fairly short statement and to be let go after he had gone in to put his plans in for 2023.
Yeah, I just think the whole thing lacked taste. Even the decision to remove him, first of all, the statement after. I think Colm Bonner's his own statement was classy. You know, there was no gripes or there was no kind of parting shots issued by him. It was really just best luck to Tipperary and thanks for everything involved, which was good. His stock went up after that, from my perspective. But the question was raised on the back of Tipperary's exit of the championship a few weeks back, and I repeat my answer to that question was, this is not soccer. Like, he was dealt a very, very difficult hand in terms of, you think of some of the players he lost. Again, we're talking about generational grace. So in Tipperary's situation there, they lost, Pádraig Brendan basically lost Bonnar, when you think of it that way as well. So you're losing major players, and then had to lose James Cannon throughout the year. Then he introduced young players. So if you were giving him a brief, you were saying to Tipperary, right, challenge as best you can. Are you good from Ireland? No. Can you win Munster? Potentially. But introduce, there was an understanding there that you had to introduce some young players because they were in kind of a transitional mode, you could say. And I think the brief he was given, he satisfied that brief. He's introduced young fellas that we hadn't heard of, who produced stellar performances, and all while he lost some of his big players. I just think it was highly, highly disrespectful. It shouldn't have happened. He should have at least been given a second year. regardless of what you can implement in 1 year, you know, it should never really reflect, you know, a decision of that. It shouldn't happen. He should have been given 2 years. The third one, okay, I think if he was to be let go after the second year, after another probably a repeat bad performance or bad season, I'd say fair enough. But he had to be given 2 years at a minimum, let's say. And it just, I don't know, the whole thing seemed like it was structured from weeks out. You know, I thought it was very, very convenient that Liam, like Cahill, resigned from Waterford. Was it the day after or the day of?
Less than 24 hours afterwards.
Yeah, it screamed to me. Now this could be one major coincidence, but I don't believe in coincidence, right? I just think that this is rehearsed a few weeks back, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, Paula, I don't think it's coincidental at all. Notwithstanding that, like, Liam Cahill has spoken to Tipperary County Board on 2 separate occasions to potentially take over as manager. We go back to when Mick Ryan transitioned into Sheedy, and then also when Bonnar came in last year. It was very clear that Tipperary were interested in appointing Liam Cahill at that point, and agreements weren't found in either of those cases. Now, this time round, Liam Cahill had said, we spoke about it a few weeks back, he was on Show Sport and TG Carr. It was all full steam ahead, getting ready for December, can't wait to go back in. We're going to solve the issues that Waterford had in the year just gone by. We're going to have a better summer. And then Liam Cahill makes himself available and leaves Waterford within a fairly short period of time after the Tipperary management had been removed. I think in this case 2 + 2 = 4.
Yeah, like, I mean, it all happened so quickly and within such a short space of each other that, like, it has to just point this direction. I don't see why Liam Cahill would step away after making the commitments he said he was going to make, and then, you know, it was all, like you said, it was all going to be gung ho for Waterford, and then, you know, there seems to be no smoke without fire here. The fact that then Colm Bonnar is moved on and now there's the open position, like you said, I expect probably by the time this show even comes out that we'll have Liam Cahill as Tipperary manager. But yeah, look, I mean, you have to. It has to be all roads point in that direction. That, look, it was like James was saying, this was all planned a few weeks out.
Well, it all comes down to how quickly I can edit the video to decide if that happens before the news is actually out. I'm going to try and get this out on Monday evening on YouTube if possible. So something's gone wrong if you're not seeing this at 10 p.m. on Monday. There are plenty of other vacancies, which we can talk about a bit next week as well. Laois are being heavily linked now with Tommy Dunn, who was part of the management team with Colm Bonnar last year. Dublin Waterford jobs are up for grabs currently. So there's a few tasty positions ahead of next year. We can maybe dig into them in a little bit more detail next week when we have our final show of this run of Series 1 of the Hurling Pod. Lads, been great to chat to you and break down the All-Ireland final, and we'll speak again next week.
Sound, lads.